The dust kicked up from Samuel Mackenzie's boots as he paced the wooden porch of his ranch house for the 10th time that morning. His weathered hands, calloused from years of working cattle and mending fences, trembled slightly as he adjusted his best Sunday shirt. Today was the day his mail-order bride would arrive on the afternoon train from Chicago. Samuel had never been good with words, especially around women. At 32, he was considered a confirmed bachelor by most folks in Cedar Ridge, Texas. His ranch was prosperous, his cattle healthy, and his reputation solid, but loneliness had finally driven him to place an advertisement in the Chicago Tribune. After months of correspondence with Miss Eleanor Hartwell, she had agreed to come west and marry him. The letters they'd exchanged painted a picture of a proper young lady from a good family. She wrote about her love of reading, her skill with needlework, and her desire to start fresh in the frontier. What she didn't write much about was herself personally, always keeping her responses polite but distant. Samuel figured she was just being proper, the way city ladies were taught to be. His foreman, Jake Martinez, rode up to the house just as Samuel was checking his pocket watch for the 15th time. Jake had worked the Mackenzie ranch for 8 years and had become more like a brother than an employee. He was one of the few people who knew about Samuel's bride arriving today. "Boss, you're gonna wear a hole in them floorboards if you keep passin' like that," Jake said with a grin as he dismounted. "Train don't come for another 3 hours." Samuel stopped his pacing and leaned against the porch railing. I know. Just can't seem to settle down today. What if she takes one look at me and decides to get right back on that train?" Jake laughed and shook his head. "Samuel Mackenzie, you're one of the most decent men I know. You got a good spread here, you treat your hands fair, and you never cheated nobody in your life. Any woman would be lucky to have you." "That's kind of you to say, Jake, but I ain't exactly what you'd call smooth with the ladies. Remember what happened with the widow Peterson at the church social?" "You mean when you accidentally called her by her dead husband's name?" Jake chuckled. "That was just nerves. This is different. You've been writing to this lady for months. She knows what she's getting into." Samuel hoped Jake was right, but doubt gnawed at him like a splinter under the skin. Eleanor's letters had been proper and polite, but they revealed little about her true personality. He wondered if she was as nervous as he was, traveling alone across half the country to marry a man she'd never met. The morning passed slowly as Samuel tried to keep himself busy with ranch work, but his mind kept wandering to the train station. He'd arranged for Doc Williams and his wife to meet Eleanor and bring her to the ranch, thinking it might be easier for her to have another woman present when they first met. Mrs. Williams had been excited about the whole arrangement and had promised to make Eleanor feel welcome. As noon approached, Samuel finally gave up trying to work and headed into town. Cedar Ridge was a small but growing community with a main street lined with wooden sidewalks, a general store, a saloon, a church, and the train depot. The town had been founded 15 years earlier when the railroad came through, and it served the surrounding ranches and farms. Samuel stopped by the barbershop for a trim and a shave, even though he'd had both just 3 days earlier. Pete the barber raised an eyebrow but didn't comment, understanding that some occasions called for extra grooming. Next, Samuel visited the general store to pick up a small bouquet of wildflowers he'd ordered. Mrs. Chen, the storekeeper's wife, had arranged them beautifully with baby's breath and ribbon. "She's a lucky woman, Mr. Mackenzie," Mrs. Chen said with a warm smile as she handed him the flowers. "A man who brings flowers to meet his bride is a man who'll treat her right." Samuel felt his face grow warm. "I hope she likes them. I don't know much about what city ladies prefer. Flowers are flowers, and the thought behind them is what matters," Mrs. Chen assured him. By 2 o'clock, Samuel was at the train depot, flowers in hand and stomach tied in knots. Doc Williams and his wife Martha were already there, along with what seemed like half the town. News of Samuel's mail-order bride had spread quickly through Cedar Ridge, and everyone was curious to meet the woman brave enough to marry the town's most eligible bachelor. The train whistle echoed across the plains long before the locomotive came into view, black smoke billowing against the endless blue sky. Samuel's heart hammered against his ribs as the train pulled into the station with a great hiss of steam and screech of brakes. The conductor stepped down first, followed by a handful of passengers. Samuel scanned each face, looking for the woman he'd been corresponding with for 6 months. Eleanor had described herself as having brown hair and brown eyes, of medium height, and always wearing modest clothing. Several women stepped off the train, but none seemed to match her description exactly. Then, he saw her. She was the last passenger to disembark, moving slowly and carefully as if unsure of her footing. She wore a simple blue traveling dress with a matching bonnet, and she carried a worn carpet bag in one gloved hand. Her posture was straight but cautious, and she kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with the small crowd gathered at the station. But something seemed different from what Samuel had expected. Eleanor appeared smaller than he'd imagined, more delicate. Her movements were hesitant, almost fearful, and she seemed to shrink back when she noticed the crowd watching her arrival. Doc Williams stepped forward first. "Miss Hartwell? I'm Dr. Williams, and this is my wife Martha. We're here to escort you to meet Mr. Mackenzie." The young woman looked up then, and Samuel got his first clear look at her face. She was pretty in a quiet way, with large brown eyes that held a mixture of fear and determination. But there was something else in her expression, something that made Samuel's protective instincts kick in immediately. "Yes, I'm Eleanor Hartwell," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the noise of the train station. "I'm pleased to meet you." Martha Williams stepped closer with a warm smile. "Welcome to Cedar Ridge, dear. We're so excited to have you here. Samuel Mackenzie is a wonderful man, and we're sure you'll be very happy." Samuel finally found the courage to approach. He removed his hat and offered a nervous smile. "Miss Hartwell, I'm Samuel Mackenzie. It's an honor to finally meet you in person." Eleanor's eyes met his briefly before she looked down again. She seemed to flinch slightly when he spoke, though she tried to hide it. "Mr. Mackenzie. Thank you for everything." Samuel noticed her hands were trembling as she clutched her carpet bag, and she seemed to favor her left side slightly, as if moving caused her discomfort. Something wasn't right, but he couldn't put his finger on what it was. "These are for you," Samuel said, offering the wildflowers. "I thought you might like something pretty after your long journey." Eleanor's face lit up with the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "They're beautiful. Thank you so much." But when she reached for them, Samuel noticed her sleeve pulled back slightly, revealing what looked like fading bruises on her wrist. The sight made his blood run cold, but he forced himself to remain calm. Eleanor quickly pulled her sleeve down and buried her face in the flowers, breathing in their scent with obvious pleasure. "Should we head to the ranch?" Martha Williams suggested. "I'm sure you're tired from your travels, dear." The ride to the ranch was quiet, with Eleanor sitting between Martha and Samuel in Doc Williams' wagon. She answered questions politely but briefly, always keeping her responses short and her eyes downcast. Samuel found himself studying her profile, trying to understand what was causing the fear he saw in her eyes. When they reached the ranch, Samuel's modest but comfortable house seemed to intimidate Eleanor even more. She stood in the doorway looking around with wide eyes, as if she couldn't believe this was going to be her home. "It's not fancy," Samuel said quietly, "but it's clean and warm, and there's plenty of room. I fixed up the spare bedroom for you until you're ready for other arrangements." Eleanor looked at him with surprise, as if she'd expected something different. "That's very thoughtful of you, Mr. Mackenzie." Martha Williams bustled about, helping Eleanor get settled while Doc and Samuel talked quietly on the porch. "She seems like a sweet girl," Doc said, "but something's got her spooked." "You notice how she flinches when anyone moves too quick near her?" Samuel nodded grimly. "I saw what looked like bruises on her wrist too." "You think someone's been hurting her?" "Could be. Lot of women come west to escape bad situations. Maybe that's why she answered your advertisement. Either way, she's here now, and she's under your protection. Just be patient with her." After the Williamses left, Samuel found himself alone with Eleanor for the first time. She sat at his kitchen table, still wearing her bonnet and gloves, looking like she might bolt at any moment. Samuel poured 2 cups of coffee and sat down across from her, careful to keep the table between them. "Eleanor," he said gently, "I want you to know that you're safe here. Whatever brought you to Texas, whatever you're running from or afraid of, it can't touch you on this ranch." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. "You don't know anything about me, Mr. Mackenzie. You might not want me here if you knew the truth." Samuel leaned forward slightly, his voice earnest. "I know enough. I know you're brave enough to travel halfway across the country alone. I know you write beautiful letters and you love poetry. I know you're afraid of something, and that makes me want to protect you even more." For a moment, Eleanor's careful composure cracked, and Samuel saw a glimpse of the pain she was hiding. Then, she composed herself again, sitting up straighter and folding her hands in her lap. "When would you like to have the ceremony?" she asked, changing the subject abruptly. Samuel was taken aback by her directness. "Well, I thought maybe we could take some time to get to know each other first. There's no rush. You've been through a lot, and I want you to feel comfortable here." Eleanor looked at him with confusion, as if kindness was something unexpected. "But, you sent for a wife, not a houseguest." "I don't want to be a burden." "You could never be a burden," Samuel said firmly. "Eleanor, this is your home now, for as long as you want it to be. We can get married next week, next month, or next year. Whatever feels right to you." That evening, Samuel showed Eleanor around the house and the ranch. She seemed particularly interested in the small garden behind the kitchen and the chickens in their coop. When he mentioned that he'd been struggling to keep the vegetable patch going, she offered to tend it. "I love gardening," she said, her voice containing the first note of enthusiasm he'd heard. "My mother taught me when I was little. I know it might seem silly, but I've missed having dirt under my fingernails." Samuel smiled. "Nothing silly about that. This place could use a woman's touch in the garden. And everywhere else, for that matter." As the sun began to set, Eleanor excused herself to her room. Samuel heard her moving around quietly, unpacking her few belongings. He sat on the porch, wondering about the woman who had come into his life. Every instinct told him she was hiding something significant, but he found himself caring more about protecting her than satisfying his curiosity. The next morning, Samuel woke to the smell of breakfast cooking. He found Eleanor in the kitchen, still wearing her traveling dress but with an apron tied over it. She prepared eggs, bacon, biscuits, and coffee, and was setting the table with nervous efficiency. "You didn't have to do all this," Samuel said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "I wanted to," Eleanor replied. "It's the least I can do after your kindness yesterday." As they ate breakfast together, Samuel tried to make conversation. "Tell me about Chicago. I've never been to a big city." Eleanor's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "It's very different from here. Crowded. Noisy. Not much open sky. Do you miss it?" "No," she said quickly, then seemed to realize how abrupt she sounded. "I mean, it's nice to have space and quiet. The ranch is beautiful." Samuel noticed she never mentioned family or friends back in Chicago, and she seemed uncomfortable whenever he asked about her past. He decided to focus on the present instead. "Would you like to see more of the ranch today? I could show you the cattle, and there's a nice spot by the creek where wildflowers grow." Eleanor nodded, and, for the first time since her arrival, she seemed genuinely interested. "I'd like that very much." They spent the morning riding around the ranch, with Eleanor on a gentle mare named Buttercup that Samuel had borrowed from a neighbor. Eleanor proved to be a competent rider, though she seemed surprised by her own ability. "I haven't ridden in years," she said as they stopped by the creek. "I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed it." "Why did you stop?" Samuel asked, then immediately regretted the question when he saw her face close off again. "Circumstances changed," was all she said. They dismounted and walked along the creek bank, where spring wildflowers were beginning to bloom. Eleanor seemed more relaxed away from the house, and Samuel caught glimpses of the woman beneath the fear. She laughed when a calf tried to follow them, and she knew the names of all the wildflowers they encountered. You really do know about gardening, Samuel observed. My mother was wonderful with plants. She could make anything grow. Eleanor's voice grew wistful. She taught me that plants are like people sometimes. They might look dead on the surface, but if you're patient and gentle, they can come back to life. Samuel wondered if she was talking about more than just plants, but he didn't push. Instead, he pointed out landmarks and told her stories about the ranch and the area. Eleanor listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions that showed she was already beginning to think of the ranch as home. That afternoon, while Samuel was working with the horses, Eleanor tackled the neglected garden with surprising energy. Samuel watched from the corral as she pulled weeds, turned soil, and examined the struggling plants with an expert eye. For the first time since her arrival, she seemed completely at ease. Jake Martinez rode up and dismounted, following Samuel's gaze to where Eleanor worked in the garden. She's a pretty little thing, Jake observed. Quiet though. She say much about where she comes from? Not much, Samuel replied. I get the feeling she's running from something, but I don't want to push her to talk about it. Jake nodded thoughtfully. Probably wise. A lot of folks come west to start over. Whatever her story is, she'll tell you when she's ready. That evening, Eleanor prepared another excellent meal, and they ate by candlelight at the kitchen table. Samuel found himself studying her face in the flickering light, noticing details he'd missed before. There was a small scar at her hairline, barely visible unless the light hit it just right. Her hands, though obviously capable, were softer than he'd expect from someone who claimed to love gardening. And she had a way of positioning herself in chairs so she could see all the entrances to a room. Everything about Eleanor suggested a woman who'd learned to be constantly watchful, constantly ready to flee. It broke Samuel's heart and made him more determined than ever to show her she was safe. Eleanor, he said as they finished eating, tomorrow is Sunday. Normally I'd go to church services in town. You're welcome to come with me, but if you'd rather stay here and rest, I understand. Eleanor's face paled slightly. Will there be many people? Most of the town, I suppose. They're all curious to meet you, but I won't let anyone overwhelm you. We could sit in the back and leave early if you want. Eleanor considered this for a long moment. I think I'd like to go. It would be good to meet my neighbors. Samuel smiled. I'll introduce you to folks, but if it gets to be too much, just let me know and we'll head home. That night, as Samuel lay in his bed listening to the sounds of Eleanor moving quietly in the next room, he found himself making a silent promise. Whatever secrets she was keeping, whatever pain she was hiding, he would give her all the time she needed to heal. And if whoever had hurt her ever came looking for her, they'd have to go through him first. Samuel Mackenzie had sent for a wife, but what he'd received was a damaged bird with broken wings. The question was whether love and patience could teach her to fly again, or whether the secrets she carried would ultimately drive her away. In her room, Eleanor sat by the window looking out at the vast Texas sky. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she had finally found a place where she could be safe. But the fear that had driven her from Chicago still lived in her heart, and she knew that some secrets were too dangerous to share, even with a man as kind as Samuel Mackenzie. The truth she carried could destroy everything, and Eleanor wasn't sure she had the courage to risk losing the first real home she'd known in years. As sleep finally claimed her, she whispered a prayer that her past would stay buried, and that Samuel would never have to learn what kind of woman he'd truly invited into his life. Sunday morning came with a gentle breeze and clear skies. Eleanor stood before the small mirror in her room, trying to calm her nerves as she prepared for church. She had chosen her best dress, a deep green wool that she'd saved for special occasions back in Chicago. The dress fit well, though not as well as it once had. The past few months had taken a toll on her appetite and her figure. Samuel was waiting on the porch when she emerged, wearing a clean white shirt, dark trousers, and a black jacket that made his broad shoulders look even more impressive. His usually tousled brown hair was neatly combed, and he held his hat in his hands. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and Eleanor felt a blush warm her cheeks. The ride to town passed quietly, with Eleanor growing more nervous as they approached Cedar Ridge. She could see the small white church at the end of the main street, and people in their Sunday best walking toward it. Samuel seemed to sense her anxiety and reached over to gently pat her gloved hand. "Remember, if it gets to be too much, just say the word and we'll leave," he reminded her. Eleanor nodded, grateful for his understanding. They joined the stream of people entering the church, and Eleanor was immediately aware of the curious glances directed her way. Samuel kept a protective hand at the small of her back as they found seats in a pew toward the back. Pastor Henderson was a kindly man in his 60s with silver hair and warm eyes. His sermon was about new beginnings and second chances, and Eleanor couldn't help but wonder if the topic had been chosen specifically for her benefit. The congregation sang hymns she remembered from her childhood, and, for brief moments, Eleanor felt a peace she hadn't experienced in a very long time. After the service, the introductions began. Samuel stayed close to her side as neighbors approached to welcome her to Cedar Ridge. Most of the people were genuinely friendly, though Eleanor could sense the curiosity behind their polite questions. "Miss Hartwell, I'm Mary Patterson. I run the dress shop here in town," said a plump woman with graying hair and a warm smile. "If you need anything altered or made new, please don't hesitate to come see me." "Thank you, that's very kind," Eleanor replied, though privately she wondered how she would afford new dresses on whatever small allowance Samuel might give her. Mrs. Patterson seemed to read her thoughts. "Samuel's credit is always good with me, dear. Don't you worry about that." Eleanor felt another wave of gratitude toward the man who had taken her in. Samuel seemed to anticipate her every need without making her feel like a burden. The blacksmith, Tom Bradley, introduced himself along with his wife and 3 young children. Their eldest daughter, Susan, was about 16 and looked at Eleanor with obvious admiration. "Ma says you came all the way from Chicago," Susan said with wide eyes. "What's it like living in such a big city?" "Very different from here," Eleanor answered carefully. "Much busier, with less space to breathe." "I'd love to see a big city someday," Susan said dreamily. "Susan, don't bother Miss Hartwell with your foolish notions," Mrs. Bradley scolded gently. "She's not bothering me at all," Eleanor assured them. "It's natural to be curious about the world beyond where you live." Samuel watched these interactions with growing admiration for the woman beside him. Despite her obvious nervousness, Eleanor was gracious and kind to everyone she met. She had a natural warmth that drew people to her, even though she seemed completely unaware of her own charm. The one uncomfortable moment came when they were introduced to Mrs. Rebecca Foster, the banker's wife. Mrs. Foster was a sharp-faced woman who considered herself the social leader of Cedar Ridge, and she had strong opinions about proper behavior. "So Miss Hartwell," Mrs. Foster said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "how long were you and Samuel courting before you decided to marry?" Eleanor's face flushed, and Samuel saw her hands tremble slightly. "We corresponded for several months," Eleanor replied quietly. "How modern," Mrs. Foster said with barely concealed disapproval. "In my day, young ladies didn't travel across the country to marry men they'd never met. But I suppose times are changing." Samuel felt his jaw clench, but before he could respond, Doc Williams appeared at their side. "Rebecca, you old busybody," Doc said with a laugh that took some of the sting out of his words. "Let these young people be. Love finds a way, and that's all that matters." Mrs. Foster huffed but moved on to find someone else to interrogate. Eleanor looked grateful for the intervention, and Samuel made a mental note to thank Doc later. As they prepared to leave, Pastor Henderson approached them. "Miss Hartwell, I hope you'll feel welcome in our little community. If you ever need anything, or if you'd like to talk, my door is always open." Eleanor smiled genuinely for the first time that morning. "Thank you, Pastor. That means more to me than you know." The ride home was more relaxed than the journey to town had been. Eleanor seemed to have gained some confidence from successfully navigating her first social event in Cedar Ridge. "That wasn't as terrible as I expected," she admitted as they drove through the countryside. Samuel chuckled. "Most of the folks here are good people. Mrs. Foster can be a bit sharp, but her bark is worse than her bite. People were very welcoming. I wasn't sure they would be, given the circumstances of my arrival." "What circumstances?" Samuel asked, then immediately regretted the question when he saw Eleanor's face close off again. Nothing, just being a stranger, I suppose, she said, but Samuel could tell that wasn't what she'd meant. That afternoon, Eleanor worked in the garden while Samuel caught up on paperwork in his study. Through the window, he could see her kneeling among the plants, her hands gentle as she tended the struggling vegetables. She had removed her gloves and bonnet, and her brown hair caught the sunlight as she worked. Samuel found himself thinking about the glimpses he'd caught of the real Eleanor beneath her careful facade. When she'd laughed at the calf following them, when she'd defended young Susan's curiosity about the world, when she'd worked in the garden with obvious joy, these moments showed him a woman with depth and warmth and strength. But the fear was always there too, lurking just beneath the surface. The way she positioned herself in rooms, the way she flinched at sudden movements, the bruises he'd seen on her wrist that first day. Someone had hurt her badly, and Samuel found himself wondering who it had been and whether they might still be a threat. That evening, they ate dinner on the front porch, enjoying the mild spring air. Eleanor had prepared roast chicken with vegetables from the town market, and Samuel complimented her cooking skills. "Where did you learn to cook so well?" he asked. Eleanor was quiet for a moment before answering. "My mother taught me the basics, and then I had to learn the rest on my own." "What happened to your mother?" "She died when I was 16, Eleanor said softly. "Consumption. After that, I had to take care of myself." Samuel wanted to ask about her father, but the sadness in Eleanor's voice warned him away from the topic. Instead, he told her about his own parents, who had died in a cholera outbreak when he was 22. "It's hard being alone in the world," he said. "I'm glad you're here, Eleanor. This place has felt empty for too long." Eleanor looked at him with something that might have been longing. "Do you really mean that?" "Of course I do. You belong here." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Eleanor seemed more relaxed than Samuel had seen her since her arrival, and he dared to hope that she was beginning to feel safe. That hope was shattered the next morning when Jake came galloping up to the house with urgent news. "Samuel, you need to know, there's strangers in town asking questions about a woman." A woman matching Eleanor's description. Samuel felt his blood turn cold. "What kind of men?" "City men, by the look of them. Dressed too fancy for ranch work. They're telling folks they're looking for a woman who stole something valuable, and they're offering a reward for information." Samuel's jaw clenched. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing. But, boss, there's more. Tom Bradley says one of them has a real mean look about him. Big man with scars on his knuckles, like he's used to fighting." Samuel looked toward the house, where Eleanor was probably starting her morning routine in the kitchen. "She can't know about this yet. Not until I figure out what we're dealing with." "You think she really stole something?" Samuel shook his head firmly. "Even if she did, I don't care. Look at how scared she's been since she got here. Whatever these men want with her, it's nothing good." Jake nodded. "What do you want me to do?" "Keep an eye on the house. If you see anyone heading this way, come get me immediately. I'm going to town to get some answers." Samuel found Eleanor in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. The sight of her domestic contentment made his heart ache, knowing it was about to be shattered. "Eleanor, I need to go into town for a while. Ranch business. Will you be all right here?" She looked up with mild concern. "Of course. Is everything okay?" Samuel forced a smile. "Just some supplies I need to pick up. Jake will be around if you need anything." He hated lying to her, but he needed to know what they were dealing with before he could figure out how to protect her. In town, Samuel went straight to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Murphy was a fair man who'd kept the peace in Cedar Ridge for over a decade. He looked up when Samuel entered, his expression grim. "I was wondering when you'd show up, Samuel. I suppose you've heard about our visitors." "Jake told me." "What's their story?" Sheriff Murphy leaned back in his chair. They claim a woman named Eleanor Hartwell stole jewelry and money from her employer in Chicago before disappearing. They say they're private detectives hired to bring her back.
Samuel's hands clenched into fists. You believe them?
I believe they're looking for someone, but their story doesn't sit right with me.
For one thing, if this was a simple theft case, why not involve the proper authorities? Why hire private men to hunt her down? What do the men look like?
One's a big fellow, well-dressed but with the look of someone who's done violence. The other's smaller, talks fancy, but his eyes are cold. They're staying at the hotel, asking questions, showing a photograph around.
Samuel felt his stomach drop. A photograph?
Sheriff Murphy reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a piece of paper.
They left this with me, asking me to post it.
Take a look.
Samuel stared at the photograph in shock. It was definitely Eleanor, but not as he knew her.
In the picture, she was wearing an elegant dress and jewelry, her hair styled fashionably. She looked younger, happier, and there was no trace of the fear that haunted her eyes now. But what struck Samuel most was that the woman in the photograph looked well-fed and healthy, not like someone who would need to steal food or money. If anything, she looked prosperous.
This doesn't make sense, Samuel muttered.
My thoughts exactly, Sheriff Murphy agreed.
A woman dressed like that, with jewelry like that, doesn't steal household money and run away. Something else is going on here. Samuel made a decision.
Sheriff, I'm going to tell you something in confidence.
Eleanor Hartwell is my intended bride.
She came here to marry me, and she's been nothing but honest and hardworking since she arrived. Sheriff Murphy raised an eyebrow but didn't seem surprised.
I wondered if that might be the case.
What's your read on her character? She's scared of something, that's for sure. But she's not a thief.
I'd stake my life on it. Well, you might have to.
These men seem pretty determined to find her.
What are you going to do? Samuel stood up, his mind made up. I'm going to protect her.
Whatever the truth is, she deserves a chance to tell her side of the story.
Samuel, be careful.
If these men are willing to chase her halfway across the country, they're not going to give up easy.
Samuel tipped his hat. Thanks for the warning, Sheriff. I'll be in touch.
As Samuel rode home, his mind raced with questions and fears.
Who were these men really? Why were they so determined to find Eleanor? And, most importantly, how could he keep her safe?
When he arrived at the ranch, he found Eleanor hanging laundry on the line behind the house. She looked up with a smile when she saw him, but her expression quickly changed when she noticed the tension in his face.
Samuel? What's wrong?
Samuel dismounted slowly, trying to figure out how to break the news gently.
Eleanor, we need to talk.
She dropped the sheet she was holding and took a step back, her face going pale.
They found me, didn't they?
The fact that she immediately understood what he meant confirmed Samuel's worst fears.
How did you know?
Eleanor sank down onto the porch steps, her whole body trembling.
I've been expecting it. I knew they wouldn't give up.
I should have kept running. I never should have stopped here and put you in danger. Samuel sat down beside her, careful not to crowd her.
Eleanor, who are these men? What do they want with you?
Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself as if trying to hold herself together. They work for my husband. Samuel felt like he'd been punched in the stomach.
Your husband?
Eleanor looked at him with tears streaming down her face. His name is Marcus Blackwood. He's a very wealthy man in Chicago, and very powerful.
And very cruel.
The pieces began falling into place in Samuel's mind. The bruises, the fear, the way Eleanor positioned herself to watch for danger.
He hurt you. It wasn't a question, and Eleanor nodded miserably. For 3 years, he hurt me. He said I belonged to him, that no one would believe me if I told anyone, that I could never escape him. Samuel felt a rage building in his chest that was unlike anything he'd ever experienced.
But you did escape. I took some jewelry that had belonged to my mother, jewelry he claimed as his when we married. I pawned it for train fare and ran. Eleanor looked at him with desperate eyes.
Samuel, I'm so sorry. I never meant to bring this trouble to your door.
I'll leave tonight, I promise. Like hell you will, Samuel said firmly.
You're not going anywhere.
Eleanor stared at him in shock.
But, you don't understand.
Marcus has money, influence, men who will do anything he pays them to do.
He'll destroy you to get me back.
Samuel took her hands gently in his.
Eleanor, look at me.
I don't care how much money or power this man has. You're under my protection now, and I won't let him hurt you again.
You can't stop him, Eleanor whispered. No one can stop Marcus Blackwood.
Samuel stood up, his jaw set with determination.
We'll see about that.
For the first time since arriving in Texas, Eleanor allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had found someone strong enough and stubborn enough to stand against the man who had made her life a living hell. But, deep down, she knew that Marcus would never let her go willingly, and she feared that Samuel's kindness and courage might not be enough to save either of them from what was coming.
Samuel spent the rest of that day making preparations.
He sent Jake into town with instructions to watch the hotel and report back on the stranger's movements. He cleaned his rifle and pistol, checking the ammunition carefully. Most importantly, he sat down with Eleanor and insisted she tell him everything about Marcus Blackwood and what they might be facing. Eleanor's story came out in halting pieces, interrupted by tears and long silences. She had been 17 when her mother died, leaving her alone and nearly penniless in Chicago. Marcus Blackwood was a businessman in his 40s who owned several factories and had significant political connections. He had presented himself as her savior, offering marriage and security when she had nowhere else to turn.
I thought I was so lucky, Eleanor said bitterly as they sat in Samuel's kitchen that evening.
A rich, powerful man wanted to marry me. I thought it meant I would be safe and cared for.
What happened after you married him? Samuel asked gently.
Eleanor's hands trembled as she wrapped them around her coffee cup. At first, he was charming. But, after the wedding, he changed. He said I was his property now, that everything I had belonged to him. He took my mother's jewelry, her letters, even her Bible.
Said wives didn't need personal possessions.
Samuel felt his anger building again, but he kept his voice calm.
When did he start hurting you?
The first time was about 6 months after we married. I had spoken to another man at a social event, just polite conversation, but Marcus saw it as flirting.
When we got home, he... Eleanor couldn't finish the sentence, but Samuel understood. It got worse over time, Eleanor continued. He became more controlling, more violent. He would lock me in my room for days if I displeased him. He told everyone I was delicate and sickly, that I needed to be protected from too much society. People thought he was being caring, but really he was isolating me. Samuel reached across the table and took her hand. How did you finally get away?
He left for a business trip to New York. Usually, he would lock me in, but this time his housekeeper was supposed to watch me. She was an older woman named Mrs. O'Malley who had been kind to me when she could.
I think she suspected what was happening.
Eleanor's voice grew stronger as she continued. Mrs. O'Malley told me Marcus had been saying he was going to have me committed to an asylum when he returned. He had been telling people my behavior was becoming erratic, setting up the story.
She said if I was going to run, it had to be that night. So you took your mother's jewelry and left? Eleanor nodded.
Mrs. O'Malley helped me get to the train station. She gave me what little money she had and told me to go as far west as I could. I pawned my mother's pearl necklace in Kansas City and used the money to get to Texas. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, processing everything Eleanor had told him.
Eleanor, why didn't you tell me the truth in your letters? I would have understood.
How could I?
What man wants a wife who's already married? What man wants to take on the troubles I bring?
Eleanor looked at him with desperate eyes. I thought maybe if I could start over, become someone new, I could leave Eleanor Blackwood behind and become Eleanor Hartwell again.
Is that your real name? Hartwell?
It was my maiden name. Eleanor Hartwell died the day she married Marcus Blackwood, and I've been trying to bring her back to life ever since. Samuel stood up and began pacing the kitchen.
Eleanor, I need to ask you something important, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Eleanor tensed, fearing what was coming. Are you legally divorced from this man? Eleanor's face crumpled. No. I just ran.
I couldn't get a divorce. Women can't just leave their husbands, especially not powerful men like Marcus. The law wouldn't help me.
No one would help me.
Samuel stopped pacing and turned to face her.
So in the eyes of the law, you're still his wife?
Yes, Eleanor whispered.
Which means he has every legal right to take me back.
And you could be charged with kidnapping or interfering with a husband's rights if you try to stop him. The full weight of their situation settled over them both. Marcus Blackwood wasn't just a cruel husband, he was a man with the law on his side, and the resources to use it.
There's something else, Eleanor said, her voice barely audible.
Marcus has connections with judges, politicians, lawmen. He could make life very difficult for you, for this whole town, if he wants to.
Samuel sat back down and took both of Eleanor's hands in his. Eleanor, look at me.
I don't care about the law, I don't care about his money or his connections. What he did to you is wrong, and I won't let him do it again.
But, Samuel, you don't understand. No, you don't understand, Samuel interrupted firmly but gently. I've fallen in love with you.
Not the woman in those letters, not some idea of a perfect wife, but you.
The real you.
The woman who tends my garden with such care, who makes this house feel like a home, who's brave enough to travel across the country alone to escape a nightmare.
Eleanor stared at him in shock. You love me? Even knowing what you know now? Especially knowing what I know now. Eleanor, you're the strongest person I've ever met.
You survived 3 years of hell and found the courage to escape. You deserve to be free, to be happy, to be loved by someone who treasures you. Eleanor began to cry, but, for the first time since Samuel had known her, they seemed to be tears of hope rather than despair. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching rapidly.
Jake's voice called out from the yard. Samuel! They're coming! The 2 strangers, and they've got 3 more men with them.
Samuel was on his feet instantly, grabbing his rifle from where it leaned against the wall.
Eleanor, go to the bedroom and stay there. No matter what happens, don't come out until I tell you it's safe. Eleanor grabbed his arm. Samuel, please. Just let them take me.
I can't bear to see you hurt because of me. Samuel cupped her face gently in his free hand.
Trust me, Eleanor. I'm not going to let anything happen to you.
Eleanor reluctantly went to the bedroom, and Samuel stepped out onto his front porch just as 5 riders came into view. Even in the gathering dusk, he could see that these were hard men, the kind who solved problems with violence. The leader was a large man with graying hair and expensive clothes that couldn't hide his brutal nature. This had to be Marcus Blackwood. Beside him rode a smaller, weaselly-looking man and 3 others who had the look of hired guns.
Mr. Mackenzie, Blackwood called out as they approached the house. I'm Marcus Blackwood from Chicago. I believe you have something that belongs to me.
Samuel stepped to the edge of the porch, his rifle held casually but ready.
I don't know what you're talking about. Blackwood's face darkened. Don't play games with me, cowboy. My wife is here, and I've come to take her home.
I don't see any woman here who wants to go with you, Samuel replied calmly. One of the hired men started to dismount, but Samuel shifted his rifle slightly in their direction. I'd stay mounted if I were you, gentlemen. This is private property, and you're not welcome here. Blackwood's face flushed with anger. You're harboring a thief and an adulteress. I have every legal right to reclaim my property.
Property? Samuel's voice took on a dangerous edge. We don't consider women property out here, Mr. Blackwood. The law says otherwise. Eleanor is my legal wife, and anyone who interferes with a man's right to his wife is breaking the law." From somewhere behind the house, Samuel heard the sound of more horses approaching. He hoped it was Jake with reinforcements, but he couldn't afford to take his eyes off the men in front of him. Even if that were true, Samuel said, it would be a matter for the local sheriff, not private guns. Blackwood laughed coldly. "Sheriff Murphy won't be a problem. I've made it worth his while to see things my way." Samuel felt a chill of fear, not for himself but for Eleanor. If Blackwood had bought off the sheriff, they were truly on their own. Besides, Blackwood continued, "This doesn't have to be unpleasant. I'm a reasonable man. I'll pay you for your trouble, and you can forget you ever saw Eleanor." "How much?" Samuel asked, and Blackwood's face lit up with greedy satisfaction. $1,000. More than you'll see in 2 years of ranching." Samuel appeared to consider this. "That's a lot of money." "It is indeed. More than enough to find yourself another woman, one who doesn't come with so much baggage." Samuel nodded slowly, then looked Blackwood directly in the eye. "You know what, Mr. Blackwood? You can take your money and go straight to hell." The hired guns reached for their weapons, but Samuel was ready. His first shot knocked the nearest man from his saddle, and he dove for cover behind a porch post as bullets splintered the wood around him. The gunfight was brief but intense. Samuel had the advantage of cover and superior knowledge of the terrain, but he was badly outnumbered. Just as he was beginning to think his position was hopeless, reinforcements arrived. Sheriff Murphy appeared from behind the barn with a rifle in his hands, but instead of helping Blackwood as the man had claimed, he began firing at the hired guns. Behind him came Doc Williams, Tom Bradley the blacksmith, and several other men from town. "What the hell?" Blackwood shouted as his carefully laid plans crumbled around him. "Turns out lying to a sheriff and trying to bribe him is a bad idea," Murphy called out. "Especially when that sheriff was already suspicious of your story." The gunfight ended when the surviving hired men threw down their weapons and surrendered. Blackwood himself had taken a bullet in the shoulder and was bleeding heavily as Doc Williams attended to his wound. "You fools," Blackwood snarled as Sheriff Murphy cuffed his hands. "I'll have all your badges for this. I'll sue you for everything you own." "Good luck with that," Sheriff Murphy said calmly. "Turns out I sent a telegram to the Chicago police about your missing wife story. They were very interested to hear from me." Samuel felt his heart stop. "What did they say?" Sheriff Murphy smiled grimly. "They said Eleanor Blackwood was presumed dead. Seems her husband reported her as having drowned in Lake Michigan 3 months ago. Collected a nice life insurance policy on her too." Samuel stared at Blackwood in horror. "You told people she was dead?" "She was supposed to be," Blackwood snarled. "The asylum would have been a more merciful end than what I had planned for her." Eleanor appeared in the doorway behind Samuel, having heard the gunshots stop. When she saw Blackwood wounded and in chains, her knees nearly gave out with relief. "It's over, Eleanor," Samuel said, rushing to support her. "It's really over." Sheriff Murphy approached them with a grave expression. "Miss, I need to ask you some questions for my report, but first I want you to know, legally speaking, you don't exist right now. Eleanor Blackwood is officially dead, and that might work in our favor." Eleanor looked confused, but Doc Williams, who had finished treating Blackwood's wound, explained. "What the sheriff is saying is that you have a clean slate. You can legally become Eleanor Hartwell again, or anyone else you want to be." "What about Marcus?" Sheriff Murphy's face was grim. "Well, he's facing charges for filing false insurance claims, hiring men to commit crimes across state lines, attempted murder, and about a dozen other things. He won't